They said she was foolish. They said a woman like her, alone with a child and a dog, had no business trying to survive a winter like that. They watched her from warm windows, shaking their heads, whispering behind closed doors. But when the coldest night came, when the temperature dropped so low that breath turned to ice and hope began to freeze, everything they believed about her, about strength, about survival, shattered like glass under pressure. And in that moment, the woman they had mocked became the only reason some of them were still breathing. She arrived in late autumn, when the leaves had already fallen and the first frost was beginning to settle on the ground. Her name was Emma, though few in the town bothered to learn it. She drove an old pickup truck that coughed black smoke and rattled over the dirt road leading to the edge of town. In the passenger seat sat her daughter, a small girl no older than 5 with wide brown eyes and a threadbare coat. In the truck bed, a German shepherd mix stood with his nose to the wind, ears alert, watching the strange new world pass by. If you're enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Thanks. Emma had bought a plot of land no one else wanted. It was on the outskirts past the last row of houses, where the forest began and the wind cut through without mercy. The land was cheap because it was considered worthless. No water hookup, no electricity nearby, no road maintenance in winter. The real estate agent had tried to talk her out of it, but Emma signed the papers without hesitation. She didn't explain herself. She didn't need to. The first thing people noticed was that she didn't ask for help. In a town where everyone knew everyone, where favors were currency and conversation was expected, Emma kept to herself. She unloaded her truck alone, carrying boxes and bags into the clearing she had chosen. Her daughter, whose name was Lily, stayed close, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one arm and holding the dog's collar with the other hand. The dog, a loyal creature named Bear, watched everything with calm intensity, his presence a quiet shield around the small family. Emma began building almost immediately. Not a house, not a cabin, but something the neighbors would later call a shack. It was small, barely large enough for 2 people and a dog. She used salvaged wood, tarps, and corrugated metal sheets she had brought with her. She worked from dawn until dusk, hammering, sawing, lifting beams that seemed too heavy for her frame. Lily played nearby, making small houses out of sticks and stones, while Bear lay beside her, his eyes always tracking Emma's movements. The neighbors watched. They stood at their fences, arms crossed, heads tilted in judgment. They watched her struggle with the wood. They watched her hands bleed. They watched her pause to wipe sweat from her forehead, only to continue without complaint. And they laughed, not loudly, not cruelly at first, but with the kind of dismissive amusement reserved for those deemed foolish. One woman, Mrs. Calloway, who lived in the nearest house, told her husband that Emma wouldn't last a month. Another man, Mr. Jennings, who worked at the hardware store, joked that she was building a doghouse, not a home. At the local diner, over coffee and eggs, people speculated. Was she running from something? Was she mentally unstable? Why would a woman with a child choose to live like that, especially with winter coming? No one offered help. No one knocked on her door, if it could even be called a door. No one brought casseroles or firewood or words of encouragement, because in their eyes Emma had made her choice, and foolish choices, they believed, deserved foolish consequences. Emma didn't seem to notice, or perhaps she had learned long ago not to care. She continued building. She insulated the walls with layers of old blankets and foam she had scavenged. She dug a shallow trench around the structure to divert water. She reinforced the roof with extra beams and weighted it down with stones. Every action was deliberate, methodical, as if she were following a plan only she could see. Lily helped in small ways. She handed her mother nails. She held the flashlight when the sun set too early. She sang soft songs to Bear, who lay beside her like a guardian statue. The girl never complained. She never asked why they couldn't live in a normal house, why they couldn't have heat that came from a switch on the wall, why other children had warm beds and she had a sleeping bag on a wooden floor. She simply trusted her mother, the way children do when they have no other choice. The shack took shape slowly. It was rough, uneven, patched together with mismatched materials, but it was solid. Emma had made sure of that. She tested every joint, every board, every corner. She knew what was coming. She had lived through winters before, in places where survival wasn't guaranteed, where cold wasn't just uncomfortable, but lethal. She had learned to prepare, to anticipate, to build not for comfort but for endurance. As October bled into November, the temperature began to drop. The first snow came early, a light dusting that melted by noon. But Emma didn't relax. She gathered firewood obsessively, stacking it high against the side of the shack under a tarp. She collected water in every container she could find, knowing the ground would freeze soon. She dried herbs and stored canned goods in a makeshift pantry she had built into the wall. She sewed extra layers into Lily's coat and made a padded bed for Bear near the small wood stove she had installed. The neighbors continued to watch, but now their amusement was tinged with something else. Concern, perhaps, or maybe pity. Mrs. Calloway mentioned to her husband that someone should call social services. Mr. Jennings said it was none of their business. A younger woman named Rachel, who had recently moved to town, suggested bringing them a meal, but her boyfriend laughed and said if Emma wanted to live like a hermit, that was her problem. And so the distance remained. Emma on one side, the town on the other. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, she didn't try to make friends. She simply worked day after day, preparing for something the others couldn't quite see. By mid-November the snow came in earnest. It fell thick and fast, covering the ground in a blanket of white that muffled sound and erased roads. The town adapted easily. They had modern homes with central heating, insulated walls, and generators for backup. They drove trucks with snow tires and kept their driveways clear. Winter was an inconvenience, not a threat. But Emma's shack stood alone on the edge of the forest, small and fragile looking against the vast white landscape. Smoke rose from the metal chimney she had fashioned, a thin grey line against the heavy sky. Inside, Emma kept the fire burning low and steady, rationing the wood, keeping Lily close, letting Bear sleep across the doorway. The neighbors stopped laughing. Now they simply shook their heads. Some felt a vague guilt, wondering if they should have done more. Others felt vindicated, believing Emma's stubbornness had brought her to this point. But no one knocked on her door. No one checked to see if she and Lily were warm enough, fed enough, safe enough, because in their minds she had chosen this, and choice, they believed, absolved them of responsibility. December arrived with brutal cold, the kind of cold that burned the lungs and froze tears before they could fall. The kind of cold that made every breath visible, every movement slower, every moment outside a calculated risk. The town bundled up and stayed indoors. Christmas lights went up. Fires roared in fireplaces. Life continued, warm and insulated. But something was changing in the atmosphere. The old-timers felt it first, the ones who had lived in the region for generations. They noticed the way the birds had left early, the way the deer had moved down from the mountains sooner than usual, the way the sky looked at dusk, heavy and waiting. They mentioned it in passing, but no one took it seriously. Weather forecasts predicted a cold front, nothing more. The town had seen cold before. They would see it again. Emma felt it too. She felt it in the way Bear's ears flattened at night, in the way the wind changed direction, in the way the cold bit deeper each morning. She doubled her preparations. She brought in more wood. She sealed gaps in the walls with cloth and mud. She made sure Lily wore 2 pairs of socks to bed and kept Bear's fur brushed to maintain his insulation. She didn't sleep much. She listened to the wind, to the creak of the shack, to the rhythm of her daughter's breathing. On the night of December 20th, the coldest night in 50 years descended on the region like a predator. The temperature plummeted to 30 degrees below zero. The wind howled with a fury that rattled windows and tore shingles from roofs. Power lines snapped under the weight of ice. Transformers exploded in bright flashes of blue light, and within 2 hours the entire town was plunged into darkness. At first, people weren't worried. They had blankets, they had candles, they had gas stoves and fireplaces. But as the hours passed and the temperature inside their homes began to drop, panic set in. Central heating didn't work without electricity. Gas furnaces needed electric igniters. Fireplaces, many of which hadn't been used in years, filled homes with smoke because the chimneys were blocked or damaged. Generators ran out of fuel. Cars wouldn't start. Phones died. By midnight, the cold had become a living thing, creeping through walls, under doors, into lungs. Families huddled together under every blanket they owned, but it wasn't enough. Children cried. Adults shouted at each other, blaming, panicking, realizing too late that they had built their lives on systems that could fail. Mrs. Calloway and her husband tried to keep their fireplace going, but the smoke drove them into the hallway, coughing and gasping. Mr. Jennings broke into his neighbor's garage looking for fuel but found nothing. Rachel and her boyfriend considered driving to the next town, but the roads were impassable, buried under snow and ice, invisible in the dark. And then someone remembered the shack. The strange woman at the edge of town, the one who had built something out of scraps and determination, the one they had mocked. Desperation is a powerful motivator. It strips away pride, judgment, and pretense. It reduces people to their most basic need, survival. And so, one by one, they began to move through the snow toward the small structure on the edge of the forest. Some carried children, some carried elderly parents. Some came alone, shivering violently, barely able to walk. They knocked on the door, hesitant at first, then urgent. Emma opened it. She didn't ask questions. She didn't demand apologies. She simply stepped aside and let them in. The shack was warm, not comfortable, not spacious, but warm. The wood stove radiated heat that filled the small space, and Emma had rigged a system of stones around it to hold and distribute warmth. The walls, layered with insulation and sealed against drafts, held the heat in. The floor, covered with rugs and pallets, kept the cold from rising. It was cramped, with barely enough room for everyone, but it was survival. Lily sat in the corner with Bear, watching the strangers with wide eyes. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence, small and quiet and safe, was evidence enough. Emma moved among them with calm efficiency. She handed out blankets she had stored. She boiled water on the stove and made weak tea to warm cold hands. She checked on the children first, wrapping them in extra layers, making sure their fingers and toes were moving. She didn't lecture. She didn't gloat. She simply did what needed to be done. Mrs. Calloway sat near the stove, tears streaming down her face. She tried to apologize, but the words stuck in her throat. Emma placed a hand on her shoulder, just for a moment, and then moved on. Mr. Jennings stared at the walls, at the careful construction, at the planning that had gone into every detail. He realized with a sickening clarity that this woman had known. She had prepared, and they had laughed. Rachel held a small child, not her own, a neighbor's daughter whose parents were still trying to make their way through the snow. She rocked the girl gently, whispering that everything would be okay, and for the first time that night, she believed it. The hours passed slowly. The wind screamed outside, but inside the shack there was warmth, there was breath, there was life. People who had never spoken to Emma, who had judged her, mocked her, dismissed her, now owed her everything, and she asked for nothing in return. As dawn broke, pale and cold, the storm began to ease. Power crews worked to restore electricity. Roads were slowly cleared. The town began to breathe again. But something had changed, something that couldn't be undone. People left the shack quietly one by one, stepping out into the blinding white morning. Some said thank you. Some couldn't meet Emma's eyes. Some carried guilt that would stay with them for years. Emma watched them go, standing in the doorway with Lily beside her and Bear at her feet. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply closed the door and returned to the warmth of her small, sturdy home. In the days that followed, the town tried to return to normal, but normal had shifted. Mrs. Calloway brought food, leaving it on Emma's doorstep without knocking. Mr. Jennings quietly repaired a section of her roof that had been damaged by the wind. Rachel started a fund to help Emma winterize further, though Emma politely declined. She didn't need their charity. She had never needed their approval. But the gestures continued, small acts of respect, of recognition, of silent apology. The laughter had stopped. The mockery had died. In its place was something quieter, something closer to understanding. Emma didn't change. She continued to live as she always had, preparing, planning, protecting. She continued to teach Lily the skills she would need, the resilience she would carry. She continued to trust Bear, whose loyalty had never wavered, and she continued to build, Not just structures of wood and metal, but a life of dignity, independence, and quiet strength. The shack still stood at the edge of town, small and imperfect, but undeniably solid. It was a reminder, a testament, a quiet answer to the question no one had bothered to ask: what does it mean to survive? Because survival, Emma knew, wasn't about having the biggest house or the most resources or the approval of others. Survival was about preparation, about foresight, about the willingness to do what needed to be done, even when no one believed in you. Especially when no one believed in you. She had lived through winters before, in places where cold was the enemy and weakness meant death. She had learned to read the signs, to trust her instincts, to build not for show, but for function. And she had done it again, here, in a town that didn't understand her. Because she wasn't building for them. She was building for Lily, for the future, for the moments when everything else would fail. And when that moment came, when the coldest night tested everyone, it wasn't the grand homes or the modern systems or the collective judgment of the town that saved lives. It was a shack built by a woman they had called foolish, a woman who had known all along what they refused to see. Emma sat by the stove that night after everyone had left, with Lily asleep on her lap and Bear's head resting on her knee. She stared into the flames, watching the wood burn, feeling the heat on her face. She thought about the people who had come to her door, desperate and afraid, and she felt no anger, no bitterness, only a deep, quiet satisfaction. Not because she had been proven right, but because she had done what she set out to do. She had kept her daughter safe. She had survived. And in doing so, she had saved others. That was enough. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and endless, covering the world in white. The town slept, exhausted and humbled. And on the edge of the forest, in a small shack built with determination and foresight, a woman, a child, and a dog rested in warmth and peace. The neighbors no longer laughed. They no longer mocked. They had learned in the coldest night of their lives that strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition, it simply endures. And sometimes when the world is at its harshest, the ones who survive are the ones who prepared in silence, who trusted their own judgment, who built with purpose instead of pride. Emma had always known this. She had lived it. And now, whether they admitted it or not, the town knew it too. The winter continued. The snow piled higher. The temperatures remained brutal. But Emma was ready. She had always been ready. And as she held her daughter close and listened to the steady breathing of her loyal dog, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. They would survive. They always had. Because that's what she did. That's who she was. Not a woman to be pitied or mocked or saved, but a woman who saved herself. A woman who saved others. A woman who understood, with a clarity born of experience, that the most important kind of strength is the kind that doesn't need applause. It simply is. And so the shack stood, through that winter and the next, a quiet monument to resilience, to motherhood, to the unshakable instinct that tells a woman when danger is coming and how to face it, to the bond between a mother and daughter, to the loyalty of a dog who never doubted, to the truth that those who laugh loudest are often the ones who understand the least. Emma didn't tell her story. She didn't need to. The shack told it for her. Every board, every nail, every careful decision spoke louder than words ever could. And though the town would never fully understand what it took to be her, to carry the weight of responsibility and judgment and survival all at once, they learned to respect it. They learned that when the world turns cold and systems fail and safety is no longer guaranteed, the ones who survive are not always the ones with the most. They are the ones who prepared, the ones who trusted themselves, the ones who built, even when no one believed. Emma was one of those, and on the coldest night when everything hung in the balance, she became the reason others survived too. Not because she wanted recognition, not because she sought validation, but because when it mattered most, she was ready, and in the end that made all the difference. The fire burned low in the stove. Lily stirred in her sleep. Bear's tail thumped softly against the floor. And Emma, the woman they had mocked, the woman they had doubted, the woman who had built a shack in the snow, closed her eyes and rested. She had done enough. She had been enough. And that, she knew, was everything. If this story moved you, Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us share more powerful stories about resilience, courage, and the strength of the human spirit. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. And tell us in the comments, have you ever been doubted by everyone only to prove them wrong? We'd love to hear your story. Thank you for watching.